Hi, this is John Harcher, and welcome to episode 17 of Valleys of Numenor. I'm part 6 of the story of Conan the Barbarian, as told in the Numidian Chronicles. Today, it's Conan the King, as the Cimmerian moves from adventurer to mercenary general to leader of a revolution that leads him to the throne of the mightiest kingdom of the Hyborian Age. But the turmoil did not end there, and the barbarian had to defend his throne from forces both mortal and supernatural. Conan and Valeria returned from the south and prepared to head for the coast. They quietly returned to Sukhmet, where they heard the rumblings of an old man who spoke of fabled jewels named the Teeth of Gwalar. The woman dismissed him, but Conan demanded he continue. The jewels were hidden in the ancient capital of Kishan, Alkmenen, which had been abandoned generations ago. He then spoke of certain things in the southern kingdoms Conan knew that most others from the north did not. Valeria said she had had enough of lost cities and would return to the sea, but nothing could sway the thought of the jewels from the barbarian's mind. So, after one final night together, the Cimmerian headed to the east, while the Aquilonian headed west. There were tales she teamed with a sailor from a sunken vessel to rule the Western Ocean and sought to find the old pirate who taught her the ways of the buccaneer. But those tales are told elsewhere. Conan made his way to Kishan, equipping himself as a northern mercenary general and coming up with a plan to present to the king, where he would lead their armies against their neighbor Punt. But when he arrived in Keshia, he found his old adversary Thutmekri was there as well. The Stygian offered the help of Zimbabwe to battle their enemy, and this plan more appealed to the king. Their high priest, Gorulga, said they would need to travel to Alkmenen and hear from Yelea, oracle of the city who had been dead for 1,000 years, or so they said. So Conan learned for himself where the old city was and started for it on his own. The city was contained within a series of high cliffs. To a purebred Cimmerian, sheer cliffs were of no consequence, as he could scale them with little effort. Once inside the city, he became almost lost in a maze of caves. After falling into an underground river, he soon discovered the oracle. Yelea then speaks to him and tells him to leave. The Cimmerian's fear at first then turns to disgust as he grabs the veil off the oracle to reveal a birthmark on her leg. The barbarian immediately recognized her as Muriela, a Corinthian dancing girl who belonged to Zargiba. Realizing she could be used to his advantage, he tells her to instruct the high priest to make Conan the head of the army. He leaves her in the temple but sees Zargiba sneaking out into the garden. He follows him, but then sees him staring at him from under a tree, yet much taller than he actually was. When Conan investigates, he finds a merchant's head hanging from the branches of the tree. When the priest and his entourage arrive, they are accompanied by Graunga, who was working with Zargiba and told him where the oracle's temple was. Gorulga asks Muriela as Yelea what they should do, and she tells him as Conan instructed. But when the group leaves, Guarunga stays behind and attacks the girl, demanding she tell him why she changed the plan. Conan comes out of the dark and kills him. He then tells the girl to get a jewel she dropped. When she leaves the room, she briefly screams and then is gone. Conan finds her dress in a secret doorway. He opens it and enters. There he finds the story of the city and drawings on the wall. A man from the north named Beat Yakin had been the builder of the city, and he used a strange band of creatures he called his servants to help him in this endeavor. It turned out those servants were still alive and living in the city. They took Muriela and killed the priests who had taken the jewels from their hiding place. Conan followed, rescued the girl, and took the box for himself. They made their way towards the exit of the city when one of the servants chased after them. On top of a high stone bridge, the barbarian battled the beast and grievously wounded it. But it raced by him and took Muriel and the chest, then suddenly collapsed, causing the girl and the jewels to be hanging onto the edge of a cliff above the river below. The Cimmerian could only get one before the other fell, so he did the only thing he could do. He grabbed Muriel, and as for the chest, he had to let it go. The two escaped and decided to head to Punt, where an ivory goddess was worshipped. The chronicles do not tell the exact story of how Conan became king of Aquilonia. There are many legends that exist of how it happened. This is one version of that tale. Conan and Muriela tried a similar ruse as they did in Alcmenon, and it worked. Conan thought they could continue the trick elsewhere in the southern kingdoms, but Muriela found she liked it in Punt and begged him to leave her there. The Cimmerian agreed, took his riches, and headed north. As he traveled into the deserts, he ran into his old tribe, the Zuagers, once more. They told him they were hosting two men from the province of Poitou and Aquilonia. One was Prospero, the current leader of the feared guard, the Black Dragons. The other was the famed military commander, Count Trocero. Aquilonia and Turan were at war, and almost all the countries in between, save Numidia, were involved. Yezdegerd had taken over much of Zamora and Carinthia and was making his way into Brythunia. The two men were looking for allies wherever they could find them. Conan met with them and offered his services, for a hefty price, to lead a mercenary army into the desert and draw the Turanians back to defend their own territory. He then recruited men from all of his former alliances, Zuagers, Kozaki, Hillmen, and mercenaries from Argos, Shem, and Koth. The army began to take back large swaths of Zamora and stop the advance into Brythunia by forcing the Turanians to retreat to protect their own land. Yezdegerd sent Basur, one of his greatest generals, out to stop the mercenary army. He came up with a battle plan but was unable to leave Agrapur due to illness. However, during his time in Turan, Conan had read about all the great victories the general had, and even a scroll Basur had written himself on war strategies. By knowing what the Turanians were going to do, Conan was able to counter every move and dealt them a horrible defeat in the desert. Because of that, and the hidden actions of a certain she-devil with a sword, Yezdegerd drew his forces back to his own lands and offered tribute to Aquilonia as recompense. But the chaos across the Hyborian world continued when in Zingara the king Conan helped gain the throne was exiled and a new king took over. His first act was an invasion of Poitou, made easier with the absence of Trocero and Prospero. With Aquilonia's main forces out in the desert, the minister Publius sent a falcon out to deliver a message to Trocero. The bird had been a gift from the wizard Pelias in the days before he disappeared when the count was younger. Its gift was that it would always return to its owner. Within a day, it reached them in the heart of the Zamoran desert. Trocero told Conan about the message, but the army was engaged in a full assault on the Turanian army, pushing them towards Agrapur. Conan immediately pulled the military forces out of the battle and told them to head for the Road of Kings, the trade route that ran from the desert to the sea. Once there, they were to charge full onto Zingara. A few days later, the Zingarans were caught off guard by a swarm of mercenaries assaulting them on all sides. They were forced out of Poitou and cut down before they could reach the Road of Kings. It was an overwhelming victory. Conan led the army back for a victory celebration in the Aquilonian capital. It was a twin city on either side of the Tiber River. The old city, Tamar, had been its ancient capital and had many older style buildings and castles. And several hundred years ago, King Turan, known as the Wanderer, sought to establish his own capital and built a sparkling new city directly across the river. He named it after himself, Turantia. From that point forward, the kings used both cities as capital. Phalaris favored Tamar and its more modest trappings, but Numidides preferred the extravagant sprawl of the latter. The king had his citizens line the streets of both cities in welcome to its newest hero. But as the parade crossed the river, something snapped in Numidides, and he harbored nothing but jealousy toward the Cimmerian. He welcomed the mercenaries into the palace, where he served them a great feast and had Conan sit next to him. But he had his wine drugged, and after a final toast, the barbarian went to get up, but staggered and fell. The king then said Conan was plotting to sell Aquilonia out to a fallen power and had him taken to the infamous Iron Tower, a prison no one had ever escaped from. Prospero and Prospero tried to talk to the king into releasing Conan and the mercenary army, but Numidides threatened them as well, and the two barely made it out of the city alive. The king then put the kingdom under martial law. But Aquilonia was not the only kingdom in turmoil. In Stygia, their leader Tothamon was suddenly removed from power. Rumor had it an ancient talisman he'd had in his possession had been lost. King Numa in Numidia and the king of Ophir had family members causing instability to their regimes. The only place that seemed to be stable was, of all places, Koth. Conan was a prisoner in the Iron Tower for the better part of a month when the king's minister Publius and the head of his personal guard, Pallantides, conspired with the Countess Albiona to get Conan out of the tower and away from the capital. They were able to hide a key and note in his meal that allowed him to get out of his bonds and escape his cage. Instead of heading towards the exit, the note told him head deeper into the prison's dungeon, where he found a tunnel that would lead under the river and over to Tamar. Conan found the underground river, swam through the tunnel with barely enough breath to survive, and found himself in the ancient palace where he was met by Pallantides. The two rode out of the city and towards the west, where he was joined by Publius, Trocero, and Prospero. The five of them decided the king needed to be removed from power, but they did not have the means to fund a revolution. There was one source that would provide enough to buy the mercenaries and bribe the officials to make it possible, the treasure of Tronikos. But with the spell cast on it, it would be impossible to get. The only solution was to get a Pictish wizard to remove the spell. Publius returned to the cities to gain support there. The other four headed toward the Pictish wilderness and the Thunder River. Conan knew the Wolf tribe had an old and powerful wizard who would be the most likely one to be able to remove the curse. The Cimmerian would take Pallantides with him, and the other three would search for support in outlying areas. The quickest way back to the coast was through the Thanandara province and the Bossonian Marches, which was a stronghold of the king's allies led by Lord Valerian. The two traveled by night and were able to take the old shaman without disturbing the rest of the tribe. They then spent the next several days making their way towards the coast. Conan promised the wizard he would be set free if he removed the curse. The wizard did so, and the Cimmerian kept his word and gave him some of the treasure and provisions to return to his village. This helps explain why, with all the turmoil during Conan's reign, the Pictish wilderness remained quiet. The treasure was recovered, but they had to get back to Aquilonia. Conan knew the best way was along the Road of Kings, but they needed to get to Mizantia first. They needed a ship. The Cimmerian went to the shore and lit a signal fire, but sent the smoke out in an odd pattern. Pallantides wondered if the fire would bring pirates. Conan said he was hoping for one in particular. 2 days later, a ship arrived. Its captain was a former mate of his Angaran merchant ship, and his partner was none other than Valeria of the Red Brotherhood. Conan's signal would only be recognized by her. The treasure was brought onto the ship, and they sailed to Argos without incident. They offloaded the treasure in the middle of the night and set towards Aquilonia. Valeria was heard of no more. Using Poitain as a base, Conan assembled his army there. Instead of striking directly towards Terentia, the Cimmerian took his forces and set to encircle the capital province. It was a risky move, as many of the areas near the capital remained loyal to the king. But soon all the outlying areas rallied behind him, honoring his past service to them. "We have not forgotten Kanajahara," was a frequent refrain and rallying cry. An uprising by Lord Valerian using the Picts to probe Conan's flank was defeated by the settlers of Thandara. Soon the capital was surrounded and unrest was spreading due to the lack of resources. But Numenor hid in the palace and sent more of his mercenary forces out to stop the invading army. The king's mercenaries soon took over Terentia, abused the people of the city, and barricaded themselves in. Had they been local soldiers, it would have been a wise decision for Conan to capture them and try to win them over. But since they were not Aquilonian citizens, he unleashed the fury of his forces on them. Soon the king's army was reduced by half in a matter of hours. To protect themselves, the mercenary generals set parts of the city around the palace on fire. But Conan continued on as the corpses of the mercenaries piled higher. Soon he reached the palace and charged his way in. Some of the guards ran in fear. The ones who tried to fight were cut down almost immediately. He kicked down the door of the throne room to find Numenor crouching behind a chair. The king threw some books and candles at the barbarian to stop his advance, but he swatted them away with his blood-stained sword. In a panic, the king grabbed a knife from a table and tried to stab him. The blade snapped on the barbarian's chainmail shirt. The tyrant then tried to grab the Cimmerian's throat, but could barely fit his fat hands around his neck. Conan tossed his blade away and grabbed the king's throat. He forced him back onto his throne and choked him to death. Numenor collapsed on the ground, and as his men poured into the room, Conan tore the crown from his blood-stained head and placed it on his own. The exact date this took place is unknown, but in legend, it became forever known as the Day of the Lion. Once on the throne, Conan set about bringing peace to his conflicted nation. He set up Tamar as his capital until the time Tarantia could be rebuilt. He named Publius as his minister, Prospero his advisor, and Pallantides as the head of the Black Dragons, the king's private guard. This upset the current leader, Grommel, who was next in line after Prospero. He conspired with two of the late king's allies, Count Volmana and Baron Dion, to turn the people against the king and take the country back for themselves. They were joined by the royal minstrel Rinaldo. Soon after Conan took the throne, he created several songs in his honor. But on an evening when pressing matters of state took precedence, the Cimmerian dismissed him, saying he had no time for his foolishness. The jester then created songs mourning the loss of Numenides, turning Conan the Liberator into Conan the Usurper. It spurred the people to create an idol of the fallen king in the temple of Mitra. The plotters also convinced King Numa of Numidia to arrange a visit from Prospero. With the Platinian out of the way, they'd attack the king in the palace and kill him. To aid them in this, they hired the desert outlaw Ascalante, who was in truth an exiled nobleman. He had recently acquired a new slave, the former leader of Stygia, Thoth-Amon. With the loss of his ring of Set, he fled the country and hid out in the desert when his caravan was attacked by the band of rogues. He survived the assault by swearing to serve Ascalante, at least until he could possibly find his ring. The night Prospero left for his journey, Conan said he was visited in his dream by the ancient wizard Epimetheus. He warned the king of danger that evening and gave him a sword with the symbol of a phoenix emblazoned on it. Conan later relayed to his scribe a verse the wizard spoke to him. When the world was young and men were weak, and fiends of the night walked free, I strove with Set by fire and steel, and the juices of the upas tree. Now that I sleep in the mount's black heart, and the ages take their toll, forget ye him who fought with the snake to save the human soul? While the other plotters met, Dion showed Thoth-Amon a ring he'd purchased from a Shemitish thief. Some legends say it was Conan's old acquaintance Esau. It was the ring of Set. The Stygian then killed Dion and took it back for himself. Using its power, he planned vengeance against Ascalante for his horrific treatment. The words he spoke came directly out of the evil book of Skelos. Under the cavern pyramids, great Set coils asleep. Among the shadows of the tombs, his dusky people creep. I speak the word from the hidden gulfs that never knew the sun. Send me a servant for my hate, O scaled and shining one. When the rebel four arrived to attack Conan, they expect to find him in bed fast asleep. When they smashed in the door, they found him fully dressed in armor with a blade in his hand. Conan smashed the sword on Grommel's helmet, killing the soldier, but shattering the blade in two. He used the hilt next to kill Volmana before grabbing an axe off the wall. Rinaldo was next to attack. Though the king did not wish to kill him, the mad minstrel sent his knife into an open area in Conan's armor. In a reflexive action, he killed the jester to save himself. Ascalante then led a group of his men into the room to take on Conan. But suddenly, an ape-like demon arrived by the window. It attacked several of the bandits' men before finding their leader and tearing his throat out with its talons. Conan grabbed the broken hilt of the sword and drove it into the demon's heart. It then disappeared in a black haze. Publius and Pallantides came into the room, along with the high priest of Mitra's temple. When Conan described what had happened, the two advisors did not believe his dream, but the priest recognized the symbol of the phoenix as Epimetheus' sign. But the sword Conan used had hung in the temple on top of Mount Galamira many days' ride away. None could explain how it was there in the king's chambers. The epic poem The Road of Kings has mostly been lost in the march of time. Some fragments survive, including those that focus on Conan's early reign and then the attempted revolt. When I was a fighting man, the kettle drums they beat. The people scattered gold dust before my horse's feet. But now that I am a great king, the people hound my track, with poison in my wine cup and daggers in my back. What do I know of cultured ways, the guilt, the craft, and the lie? I, who was born in a naked land and bred in the open sky, the subtle tongue with sophist guile, they fail when the broadswords sing. Russian and die dogs, I was a man before I was a king. Gleaming shell of an outworn lie, fable of right divine, You gained your crown through heritage, but blood was the price of mine. The throne I won with sweat and blood, by Crom I will not sell, for promises of valleys of gold, or the threat of towers of hell. Conan had been on the throne around 2 years when Strabonus of Koth sought to move against Aquilonia. Years ago, after his meeting with Thotham, he decided he needed his own supernatural force on his side. He made an alliance with the sorcerer from the Kothic wilderness, Sothalanti. At first, he aided Strabonus by strengthening his grip on the throne by wiping out any of his remaining sons who would not swear allegiance to their father. They then turned their attention to neighboring Ophir. The previous king had died long ago, and the country had been in turmoil ever since. One of his nephews, Amarus, ended up on the throne, and the wizard was able to get him under their influence. Like many of the rulers of the Hyborian kingdoms, Strabonus was trying to decide how to deal with the king of Aquilonia. But unlike many others, he knew Conan from his days as a mercenary and had clashed with him many times. The wizard advised the wisest course would be to remove him and put their own ruler on the throne. Amarus sent word to Conan he was under threat from Koth and asked for his assistance. The Cimmerian did not suspect anything since he had been a long-time ally of the ruling family. And since he knew Strabonus of old, such a move would not be out of the question for the treacherous monarch. King Conan arranged for 5,000 of his greatest warriors to march south to Koth and confront their forces in open battle. But as they marched into the plains of Shamu, the Ophirian army closed off one of their flanks. A cohort of Shemitish archers was intermingled with Kothian pikemen and trapped the Aquilonians between the two armies. To a man, the 5,000 were wiped out, though once again their king had managed to survive a massacre. A bloodied Conan was confronted by the two kings on Sothalanti. The wizard touched his arm and paralyzed him. He was placed on a cart and sent to the sorcerer's home, a blood-red castle on the outskirts of Korshemish known as the Scarlet Citadel. The king spread the word that Conan was dead and supported Arpello, a distant relative of Numenides, to take the throne. But he was nothing more than a puppet of Sothalanti, much as Strabonus was. Conan was taken to the tower and chained in its dungeon. While there in the darkness, he saw a giant snake slithering in and out of the shadows. This was Satha, the legendary serpent. The barbarian didn't move as it rose over him, dripping venom on his leg and scarring it for life. When the snake disappeared, a figure came up to Conan holding the keys to his chains. It was the war chief of Abambi, a city on the Black Coast Conan had sacked during his days as a corsair. The war chief's brother had died in the assault, and he had fled to the north and was later captured. He stole the keys from the jailer Shukeli and made the king beg for them. No matter what price, he would not give them up. But then as he went to slay the king, Satha struck from the darkness and killed the war chief. The keys fell within Conan's reach, and he loosed himself, but Shukeli arrived and bolted the gate shut so the keys would be of no use. He was in reach of Conan's sword and soon lay dead on the floor. The king had to find another way out of the prison. The tower held many evil mysteries that the Cimmerian could not describe for the rest of his days. At one point, he saw a man trapped in an odd plant. He freed him and discovered it was the long-lost enemy of Sothalanti, the wizard Pelias. He had been in the tower almost 10 years and was now seeking revenge. The two made their way to the gate but did not have the keys. Pelias used the dead jailer to remove the keys from the wall and set them free. In a magic crystal, he showed Conan his kingdom was in danger and must return quickly. When the king asked how he could get there, the wizard uttered a spell and a strange winged creature emerged from the dark. Conan got on its back and flew towards Aquilonia. In Tamar, Arpello tried to impose his will on the people. He imprisoned Conan's advisors like Publius and gave the women of the king Seraglio to the army, who treated them badly. A young student stood up and spoke out against the new king. When he tried to arrest the young man, the people stood by him. Suddenly a giant creature came out of the sky, and on its back was Conan. Arpello charged to the top of the castle, where he met Conan with blade drawn. The true king knocked the sword out of his adversary's hand with one blow, then grabbed him by the neck, lifted him over his head, and hurled him off the top of the castle, sending him crashing down into the street. Strabonus and Almerus decided not to wait for Arpello and decided to march on Aquilonia, starting with the border town of Shamar down the Tiber River from the capitals. The two armies marched into the city and thought they would be unmolested, but across the plain they saw a large force of horsemen coming towards them. As they neared, the kings recognized them as Watanian cavalry, with Trasero and Prospero leading the way, and King Conan himself in between. They also had forces from the other provinces of Aquilonia, the Gunderman pikemen, and most threatening, the Bosonian archers, the only group equal to the bowmen from Shem. The forces met and the battle was on. In a swift move, Conan and Prospero met Strabonus and Almerus and killed them both in short order. The rest of the forces scattered and were trapped at the river. Some were captured, many were killed. Salthalanti foresaw what would happen and raced off. Conan went after him and soon caught him. The wizard threatened him with an evil potion, but the king answered by slashing off the wizard's head. Suddenly, an eagle swooped down and grabbed the head out of the air and started to fly off. Then Salthalanti's body got up and raced after the bird and the head. As it flew away, it emitted the familiar laugh of Pelias. The king hoped he'd never have to deal with magic again. Unfortunately, he would face it soon in the most difficult trial of his life. The old poem, The Lion Stalks Again, was written about this incident. They trapped the lion at Shamu's plain. They weighed his limbs with an iron chain. They cried aloud in the trumpet blast. They said the lion had been caged at last. Woe to the cities of river and plain, if the lion ever stalks again. The lion strode through the halls of hell. Across his path grim shadows fell. Of many a morning, nameless shape, monsters with dripping jaws agape. The darkness shuddered with scream and yell when the lion stalked through the halls of hell. The stories in this part of the chronicle are fully told in the tale Servants of Bet Yakin, also called the Jewels of Gwalar, Phoenix on the Sword, and the Scarlet Citadel. Conan's battle for the throne was told in full in other sources under various names. Next time, our look at the story of Conan the Barbarian concludes with Conan the Conqueror, where the king is dethroned by means of magic and must travel far and wide to gain what he needs to return to the throne once more. Plus, we will look at stories of the king not contained in the Chronicles, including a thrilling voyage across the Western Sea and a war with Hyperborea. That's next time on Valleys of Numenor. Thank you for listening.